Welcome to Good Morning Hospitality, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the industry. From hotels and short-term rentals to all things travel and hospitality, you'll find each episode equips you with the information that you need to start your week. Join us on Good Morning Hospitality every Monday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so nice to see both of you. I had to put up with Damien last week. How great to have you both back.
It's been a while
How are
since it's been a few months, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been nice, isn't it? It's nice. Raphi, you get the gold star today. You're joining us from your holiday. I love the commitment.
Yeah. I'm in Brittany for for a good 10 days, enjoying the sun that we magically have this time around, and trying to get some kite surfing in. It's been a good time.
I have to say, I have to give you props,
Very
Raphi.
cool.
Raphi did send us the elusive video of her kite surfing. So we can say it is
That was
true.
wake surfing.
It is
That was
true.
wake surfing. But yeah, I did.
I never understand the difference, but I attest. It's happening.
There's a video that was taken of me this time kite surfing, which I'm trying to get a hold of because I think it's quite funny. It's a bit ridiculous. Obviously, I'm not mastering the skill yet at all.
Well, we'll enjoy it.
I will share it if I get it.
Awesome.
Please send it. Raphi, nice to take a break though. Brittany's beautiful, isn't it? I imagine it's lovely at this time of year.
Yeah, it's really nice. Really, really nice. I think it's a bit underrated, actually. I'd recommend visiting it.
Sarah, good morning to you, my friend.
morning.
You've probably done Pilates, yoga, body attack, butt
did
class.
not-
You've probably done the whole thing.
I did not go to the gym this morning, but I did go for a run, so I'll take that as a win. Because I had I'm purchasing a flat, my first investment property. Really excited. It's not a short-term rental because it's just too much of a hassle in Barcelona, as we have talked about. But it will be an investment property, so I had to go meet the architects this morning to go over some of the plans, and yeah, really exciting stuff. So I didn't have time to go to the gym this morning because the class I like is at 10 a.m. and I didn't have time for that. But I woke up early and went for a run, so I feel good with myself.
Amazing, congratulations, and very cool that you're purchasing a flat. I mean, you've lived in Barcelona a while, right? So you're making roots there, aren't you, with this purchase?
Yeah, I am. So I had I owned a house previously outside the city, and then ended up moving back into the city last year, and so I'm renting now. But I love being back in the city. But I've been in Barcelona all in total for 14 years, so it's time to start setting down some roots and diversify my investments. And I'm really excited. Yeah.
Wow. So you're looking to stay?
Yeah, definitely staying. Yeah, definitely Barcelona is home. So.
Super fun. Well, look, I don't want to brag, but if we are talking about running, I made it up this morning for a run, and you'll be impressed. There was a drop my daughter at nursery, and then a quick sort of one around the block. The problem is, like, when you have to spend the morning getting another human being ready to leave the house, you just don't care about what you look like leaving the house. So, like, now I understand why middle-aged people look so terrible when they go running, because they just throw any old t-shirt on, whatever they've got. And that is life. Like, there's nothing worse than having to brush somebody else's teeth for them in the morning. Then you definitely don't feel like brushing your own. But I made the run. I did it. I made the run, and it's a beautiful morning here in London. We have got someone here painting the house at the moment because we are about to get our house on the market. Sarah, Raphi, you'll find this exciting because we've, after months and years of deliberations, have decided to move to Brighton, to the seaside. And that's where we think we're going to.
Oh, wow.
Kids.
So nice.
That's a huge change, Leo. Congratulations. Exciting. So you found the property already,
Cool.
or just still looking?
No, but we're going to start selling ours and start looking, and we've identified a few primary schools in a few areas and all of that sort of fun stuff. So we're doing it. And Brighton's a fun town because short-term rental segue here is that if you're lucky, you can get yourself a house with a separate basement that you then can do weekend rentals in. It's a massive. You'll both know this, but for anyone who doesn't and who's listening from overseas, it's a weekend market. People come down from London. It's an hour and 10 minutes on the train, so people come down, and so a lot of people, you can have your basement. You can even use it a bit in the week, but if you turn it into a nice short-term rental, you can generate sort of £500-600 a weekend, you know, £400-500 depending. So
Right.
so yeah, fun. It's a very cool city, and there's actually lots of fun stuff here going on in the industry. So yeah, really excited.
That's amazing, Leo.
Yeah, congrats.
Now, gang, we got a packed agenda. Sarah, we've got you back for numbers and opinions. Raphi, we've dragged you over from your holiday, so we're just looking for opinions. We've got to start with short-term rental highlights because I love doing that. I have one. I think I'm the only one who's prepared. I'm the teacher's pet. I'm the only one who's prepared a short-term rental highlight. Very interesting. Very interesting piece I read quickly about this, which is Landfolk have raised 10 million euros in Series A funding. This is one to watch. I think this is like 10 million is significant in Series A. That's worth saying. Founded in 2021 by a group of former Airbnb employees. Yeah. This investment has been designed to kind of accelerate growth within Europe. In 3 years, they've managed to acquire 3,000 properties and add them to their site. And they focus primarily on the Northern European market, claiming that 85% of homes in that region, holiday homes in that region, which is 1.3 million, are standing empty. They're not being rented out. So really interesting, because we talked about this with a couple of the moves that Holiday have made, that they're trying to find this underutilized inventory that's not in the what we would call quote unquote traditional from an external tourist perspective, traditional holiday markets, and hoover it up and bring it in. And that's clearly what Landfolk are doing, right? So they reckon that 70% of the homes on their platform are exclusively on their platform or have never been rented out before.
Wow.
Claim, but similar to what Holiday are doing, right? So we talked about tourism, we've talked about the Mediterranean maybe slightly becoming more hostile to tourists. So maybe this is going to mean that people like me decide to go to Northern Europe and try that. So I thought that was significant. Don't know if either of you are interested in that one at all.
Why do we think they're open, Leo? Is it because it's cold and miserable up there? Like for 6 months out of the year? Like, that's what I wonder. Is it because they're seasonal markets? And that is just not being rude, but I live in Barcelona for a reason. I hate the cold. And so that's not something that I personally would ever think is a good idea, to go to the north of Europe in January like that, unless it's a fabulous house and I know I'm not leaving the house for a whole week and there's plenty of firewood and everything is stocked. I will sit there gladly in a blizzard and like play Uno and read a book. But I do wonder if it's actually a supply issue or if it's a demand issue. Because if it's a demand issue, you can have all the supply you want, but I wonder how they're going to create that demand. So just playing devil's advocate. I don't want to poo-poo their business, but just wondering.
No, it's good. I'll give you my unsubstantiated answer as to what I think it is, and this is without data, which is classic me, no data. But my sense is that it's very culturally very acceptable to have a second home in Northern Europe in a holiday destination. So don't think there's a chance of these areas getting regulated because it is second home ownership. But because they're slightly more traditional societies, everybody has a second home, and they might not ever think about renting it out because they wanted it to be available for themselves at the weekend and during the summer. But as those areas become hotter because of climate change, I do think more international tourists would also look, or new areas become popular because other areas become harder to navigate or too busy, too expensive. So I think there's a potential for them to have a moment from external tourists or just younger people that live in those countries that can't afford second homes, because really primary home ownership is now a much more expensive thing. So why not rent out the space to people who want to have a taster of what it's like to own a second home without actually having it, which is, so I think it's quite interesting. I'd be interested to know if Airbnb can also target and market to these people to get them to put their properties on there. But it sounds like Landfolk are stealing a march.
Really interesting one.
Watch this space. Gang, we have to keep talking about it because I know we all love talking about it. 2 weeks away, or a week and a half away from the Paris Olympics. Sarah, what are the numbers telling us?
Yeah, let's talk about what's going on. So we're noticing a really interesting phenomenon, which is overall demand nights. We're looking at 133% increase year over year, right? So a total of 584,000 demand nights are booked for the 2 weeks of the Olympics compared with last year. So this is really interesting. But what we're not seeing is an increase in occupancy. In fact, we're seeing a decrease in occupancy because there's been such an increase in supply that it's not balanced. So as an example, occupancy is currently pacing at 46% for Paris, whereas last year during the same dates, it was 59%. So occupancy is definitely lower, especially if we look at the first 2 weeks of July last year. So even like before, we were looking at 74% occupancy last year, whereas the first 2 weeks of July this year was 53%. So it seems that this influx in supply has not only affected the dates of the Olympics, but it's affecting the overall Paris market, which is definitely something for us to watch to see if that supply goes away after the Olympics and if it's just a temporary phenomenon or if operators in Paris have new market conditions that they really need to keep an eye on. The other thing to point out is that last year, 25% of stays for the last week of July were booked during the last 2 weeks of July. So basically super late time stays. We're talking about a fourth of stays booked. If that trend continues this year, then we do still stand to see even more nights booked in the next couple of weeks. That'll be a lot more last minute. And then the other thing to talk about is the available versus booked rates. So available rates, if we compare January to June, we were looking at an average available price of 619 euros per night in January in Paris versus 362 euros a night as of June. So I think hosts have definitely, as the dates of stay get closer, they're sort of dropping pricing. They're panicking a little bit because that occupancy is not where they thought it was going to be. And if we look at actual booked rates, those have held pretty stable. So I think this is an interesting one because what this means is that people have a top limit that they're willing to pay, even to stay in Paris for the Olympics. So in January, the average booked rate was 298 euros a night. And in June, it was 310 euros a night. So there's not a huge difference in there. And so it does seem that pricing of the available rates, if we go back to that available rate, average in Paris of 326 as of June, it seems that the available rates are coming much more in line with what people are willing to book at. So hopefully that will see an increase in those sort of last minute bookings as prices become more realistic. But I think it's very interesting that hosts just haven't achieved the nightly rates that they were expecting even 6 months ago.
Yeah, and you would expect that these rates are just going to continue to drop now with last minute bookings coming in, right?
It's likely, yeah.
You know, the nationality of people booking, is it mainly Europeans or is it also international bookings?
We don't know. That's a really difficult one because there's no way for us to accurately track that. There used to be a way to do that on the profile if they would leave a review, but there was always some bias to that data. And as of 2020, I think, Airbnb started hiding that for all new hosts, all new guests. So our supply for that data is really limited. So we don't have a good idea of origin of guests, unfortunately. So I don't have any data to kind of back that up. But we would think that it would be at least the last minute bookings. My hypothesis is that it's going to be those who have qualified or families, friends, sort of these friends and families of athletes who have qualified in the last couple of weeks.
Interesting. Maybe they've been badly advised or they haven't been advised and they've put the prices too high. Perhaps they should have just gone for a reasonable rate from the word go, and perhaps you'd have ahead of time been one of the people who did get a booking. Interesting. I suppose where there is such a focus on a particular event and everyone does decide to cash in, I'm sure, Raphi, you know anecdotally friends of yours in Paris that are getting out, right? So where locals are trying to cash in, it's just a supply-demand mismatch, isn't it, right? Like if everyone's like, great, I've no interest in this, I'm going to give my apartment up for the whole of August. You know, it's not. It doesn't help anyone out, right? You're just cannibalizing your potential booking. Therefore, the prices stagnate. Raphi, Parisians still a bit ambivalent towards the Olympics, or is the Olympic fever hitting?
I mean, the Parisians that I know, or my cousin, for example, who lives there, she does not want to be in Paris at all throughout the whole summer. She's just not going to be there. She's not going to be renting, but I'm assuming there's a lot of people who are just trying to get out of Paris throughout that whole period and that think, well, I might as well put up my apartment for rent as well. So yeah, I'm not surprised that the supply has increased massively.
Alrighty. Well, look, Paris Watch continues. Still, the jury's out. I think we'll talk about it on opening day, while we get ourselves excited about all of the. I might dress up actually for opening day of the Olympics. Let's see. Cancel that. I've changed my mind. I won't.
Leo,
okay.
I can't help but notice that you've stopped talking about the Euro. Sorry, I just had to get my little dig in there. But Viva España. Notice he's just gone very silent all of a sudden. No interest in speaking about it at all.
Sarah, I'm not much of a football guy. I don't know what you're talking about. It's never been my thing.
I actually watched the final, Leo. That's how excited I got.
All right, come on then, Sarah. Let's talk about it. Come on then. How was it? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy watching Spain beat England? Tell us all about it.
Oh, it was good fun. It was very good fun. The problem is I don't have a TV. And so I was watching it on a laptop and I had a bit of lag, I think. And so I would hear celebration of goals before it would actually happen. The problem with that in Barcelona is that because there's all this sometimes anti-Spain sentiment, whenever Spain plays, you never know if they're setting off fireworks for the other team or for Spain. So I wasn't sure. I was thinking somebody's just scored, but I don't know who it is, and it's gonna win the game, but we don't know which way. So the anticipation was just fabulous.
Wow.
It was for Spain, by the way. They actually were doing the fireworks thing, which is good.
I had the same thing happen in my area in London. We were having a particularly hot day, so lots of people were sat in their gardens watching it. And we have next door but one neighbors are from somewhere in Latin America, and so I couldn't tell because their kids are very English, go to school there. I couldn't tell if they were cheering for Spain or England, and I was on a lag, so it was very up in the air. Turns out they were cheering for England, so we were all upset. What can I say?
Well, sorry, I just had to get that in there, Leo. You were just silent on the topic. I figured we had to bring it out.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, look, we've waited 58 years as a nation for glory. I think we can wait 2 more. So we'll pick this up in 2 years' time when when the inevitable failure happens again. Okay, so moving on. Sarah, you're going to focus today on an article from Skift. I think it's fairly big news. I'm sure a lot of the publications are talking about it. Vrbo and major reversal on guest refund policies. Tell us about this.
Yeah, sure. So Vrbo last month reversed their longstanding policy on guest refunds and host cancellations. And so basically, Vrbo for a long time has been pro-host. So all of their cancellation policies were protecting the host. Even during COVID, they were suggesting that hosts be flexible and make refunds, but they didn't require anything. However, they've just put out new rules, which essentially tip things in favor of guests rather than hosts. This is going to look a whole lot like Airbnb's policy that they introduced in May. And so my thought here is that they're really just doing this to kind of come into line with the market. When we look at why they changed this policy, I think they were hinting at the fact that the Maui wildfires last summer really led to a lot of guest, unhappiness in not having flexible refund policies from the host. And so I think it remains to be seen if this is something that hosts are just going to kick off about, or if they're actually going to potentially leave the platform because of it. I can't imagine they would actually leave because now you have both Airbnb and Vrbo doing this. And so they're two of the biggest OTAs. I don't know where you're going to get other bookings from. I mean, there's other OTAs out there, but I think depending on where the property is located, it would have a huge impact to just boycott those two OTAs. So I don't know, Raphi, what do you think? What do you would you leave the portals over it, or have you had any specific situations where this is applied to you, or it hasn't been as big? Because it's mostly just major events, right? It's like catastrophic things like wildfires or pandemics or something like that.
Yeah, I think that these OTAs obviously have all the power, and yeah, I definitely agree that I think VRBO is just sort of coming in line with what Airbnb has already put in place because they can, and it's what guests expect. I think guest expectations are really high now. They're close to their money. There's inflation, so there's all of this that's coming into play. But yeah, I think it's a shame that they're not taking a more balanced approach because this is obviously fully on the guest side of things, but not taking into consideration owners at all. And if you think about it, like owners they're the ones who take the biggest hit, and they're actually losing money here because of the credit card fees that they're incurring as well with these cancellations. So, I mean, there are definitely different approaches that could be taken that could serve both the OTA and the owner, such as integrating insurance options into the booking process. But also, for us at Urban Network, when we were faced with the pandemic 2 or 3 years ago, we decided to put in place credit, like sort of credit holds or credit. I can't remember how you call them, but essentially what that means is instead of guests canceling, we basically gave them a credit note for 2 years, which allowed them to then rebook that property the minute the COVID allowed for travel again. And that then just allowed us to not lose any money. It allowed the owner to keep the booking as well, even if that booking came in later. And yeah, the effects, I mean, it was a win-win situation. So I think it's a shame that the OTAs aren't trying to take a more balanced approach, more in line with that sort of solution.
Fair to say, Raphi, that you as a business, OVO, you're much more connected with your host than the average OTA, right? So you're trying to come up with a balanced approach because your customer is both sides of the marketplace, right? It's the host and it's the guest. And I think that it's basically a timely reminder for hosts that a lot of the major OTAs are guest-focused businesses because they don't see the acquisition of supply as being particularly challenging, or not necessarily challenging. That's probably not the right way to describe it. It's just they don't supply problem. They probably would all say they have a demand problem, or that's more what they're fixated on. And I suppose fostering loyalty with a guest probably does trump fostering loyalty with a supplier. Cynical to say, but probably true.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe that's unfair. I don't know. I just think that there's several million hosts on Vrbo and Airbnb, and annoying one or two of them if something catastrophic or unexpected does happen. Balancing the idea that you create a very guest friendly environment for your travelers. I like this idea though, Raphi, that you could offer a credit note. I think this is smart, and I wonder why the OTAs don't do more to suggest that as the approach, right? Like just speak to your customer directly. Sorry, you've not been able to come. It's on hold. It's on ice. Here are some dates that you can pick in the future, and you could, because that's something that they could facilitate within their platforms, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we managed to do it, within quite a quick time frame. We implemented it, so I'm sure the OTAs could implement it quite easily as well.
I would think they would be motivated to do that as well, because part of this policy is like Vrbo's returning their service fee. So Vrbo in this case also loses. Whereas if it was a credit system, then in theory they'd still be able to keep that booking. And I've actually done this. I had a safari booked in South Africa, and it was supposed to be in like April of 2020, and obviously pandemic happened and nobody could travel. And I was given this voucher for 2 years, and I actually went 2 years later and used the voucher. So it was great.
And it makes sense because these travelers, I mean, if they booked it, then they want to do it. Like, and even okay, they can't do it, at this given time, but they'll want to do it later as well. I mean, they booked it, so
yeah. I mean, if you booked it for like a special event or for a wedding or something, and maybe the dates have changed, or maybe I don't know. I guess maybe that is something but that's a small percentage, I would think. So I like the idea of the credit. I think it's a wise thing, and I don't really understand why the OTAs aren't trying to do something more in that line, because it seems like it would save their bottom line as well. But
yeah, very interesting one. Let's move on to our next one. Also, this is an interesting trend to talk about. So we've pulled up an article from Short Term Rentals by Paul Stevens, but actually there's articles across the industry on this in different shapes and forms. But we're focusing here on the joint venture between Bob W. and Osborne & Co. Investment Management, which is the in-house investment management arm of the build-to-suite developer Osborne & Co. Very interesting here. They've launched a £120 million equity raise to acquire and repurpose hotels and office spaces to turn them into high-quality short-term service apartments. With the focus being Europe, right? So they name Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Poland, and the UK, with a plan to transform up to 20 to 25 buildings into up to 2,000 modern apartments having a gross value of 400 million. So significant. We're talking significant
Well,
amounts of development. I spoke to their COO, Jeremy Slater, somebody I know, and he said basically that, with interest rates being what they are and the cost of debt, ground up development has all but dried up in big cities, or is slowing down. So this idea of converting office space has become much more popular within the building sector across Europe. And so for companies like Bob W, who operate, it's the right type of deal for them to make sure that they're part of development, and they help look for these deals across Europe. And I think it's really interesting. We've all talked about the trend of people working remotely, even companies that have continued to take their office leases because they maybe had 5-year leases. As they come to an end, they're going to further reduce their headcount in offices so that they maybe have a portion of people co-working or their desks sharing because no one's coming in more than 2 days a week. So it does make sense, right? There's a lot of inventory in the middle of cities that is maybe not appropriate for residential because of where it is and is perfect for holidaymakers. And it's fairly straightforward to convert into short-term rental because you don't need to build a bar, a concierge, a reception like you would do with a hotel, and also you can at some point convert it back to residential or turn it into long-let inventory. The reason I really wanted to focus on it is because clearly, if you're doing this building, if you're getting building licenses to turn something from an office into an apartment, you get what's called in the UK a C1 license, and in Europe is called something slightly different, but you make sure that it's compatible with regulation. So you wouldn't have, for example, what you have in London, where short-term rentals are restricted to 90 days because you have a C1 license. Mm-hmm. And as we see regulations start to bite, this does give an advantage to building land companies, building companies, and people like Bob W. if they start to get their act together and do this stuff quickly. Very, very interesting. Sarah, what do you think?
I think it just continues to take away what, in my mind, is the beauty of short-term rentals, which is like, I understand that there's people who are going to want to travel in an apartment rather than a hotel. But for me, the cool thing about Airbnbs or short-term rentals in general is the uniqueness of those properties and the fact that they add to local communities. So they're run by local hosts. You have a totally different perspective. If they're all being managed by companies, and massive investment companies that really are only looking at the bottom line, in my mind, like, isn't that contributing to the problem rather than making it better? Like, if you're a government and you're trying to regulate this, it makes no sense to me to take off properties that are owned by individual hosts. If anything, you'd want to keep those on the market and restrict those who have multiple listings if you're having a housing crisis in a particular city. The other thing that I could potentially see is, I wonder if the government, I'd be curious how this shapes out, for example, in Spain, because it's not just Barcelona that we talked about recently. I know there's other major cities in Spain that are having similar sort of regulations. So I'd be curious to know where those locations are. Obviously, Spain's a market that I know pretty well. But I would be super interested to know what other regulations are coming into play and how they're getting around that. Like, I think for me, it's kind of cheeky. They did something really similar in Hospitalet, which is like right next to Barcelona, where rather than saying you can't get a short-term rental license, it was you can get a short-term rental license as long as the entire building is dedicated to short-term rentals. And so their theory was, oh, well, this is great. We won't have any complaints by neighbors. It'll be like apart hotels. And so again, it has a different licensing requirement. But my thought process is, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of short-term rentals? Like, isn't that the total opposite of what we actually want? These people are not living like locals. They don't have somebody like a local host that is helping them find cute little places to visit that maybe are off the beaten path. Like, I don't know. It ruins the spirit and the vibe for me.
I think it depends on who the customer is, right? Because I think that in this case, if it was originally an office building, it's going to be in a place that anyway won't necessarily attract the typical traveler. But if it's maybe, people who are looking to work from abroad, they don't really want to go through the whole hassle of like meeting the host, and they're not interested in, I guess, necessarily the local experience as much. They just really want to find a place that's convenient, easy to check into. I think this kind of product is maybe more suited to them without it necessarily being a hotel.
I would agree, like business travel. I think you're right, Raphi. But then wouldn't that be, in my mind, more midterm rather than short term. I think for me, the fact that they're trying to turn it into short term means that it's maybe less geared towards that type of traveler. Because when I think of like a typical business traveler, and I'd be interested to do some sort of investigation on this to see like what percentage stay over 7 days, for example, or stay for 2 or 3 months, because that's a very different profile than somebody who's just coming for a meeting for a couple of days.
I think it's capturing that demand that's, I think it's, as you say, Sarah, I think it's taking away, it's replacing the demand from the traditional short-term rental that's being clamped down on. And here is the interesting point. In lots of cities, the offices are right in the center. So one argument could be that actually that isn't an appropriate place for a local to live. They want to live in a neighborhood. And therefore, if you can get tourists right in the middle of town, it suits the tourists because they can walk everywhere, and suits the local because they can live out in their neighborhood. Now, it's never that simple. It's never that cut and dry. People are going to get their feathers ruffled by this, aren't they? One way or another. And I just think you touched upon a really interesting thing there, Sarah, is like, why is it seeming that the trend is to give licenses just to whole buildings? And then actually you could maybe help solve some of your perceived housing crisis if you took a more pragmatic view and did 50% of something, 50% for residential, 50% for short term. It's just really interesting. Clearly, it goes back to what we always say is city planners need to go street by street and work out what it is they're trying to do in the area and what the needs are. And I suppose, I hope that in the giving out of these C1 licenses and the equivalent in Europe, someone is doing that, because it is a great opportunity culturally to, as offices move out of cities, to replace them with people living in there and staying in there for a short amount of time, coming in for work and putting restaurants around these office buildings. Like it is a very exciting thing. It definitely has to be done properly though. But I think this is going to be a trend, and we're reading other articles around this in prep, and clearly investors think it's a really good bet because it's far less political. And something's got to happen with this historic office supply, which is where the demand is declining.
Yeah, I just kind of see it as like a way to skirt the rules. I know, for example, for new development, the rules are really strict, especially in large cities in Spain, where you have to have a certain percentage of the flats that are in a building of new construction dedicated to social housing. So it has to be for low income families, and you have to offer that at a much lower price than you would the rest of the properties. Whereas it seems like with this, obviously it's not being turned into traditional residential, so you don't have that. So just as we mentioned, like you're taking offices or hotels and you're not adding any new housing supply. You're just increasing the supply of short-term rentals, and you're only doing that for people who have tons of money already, who have the money to buy whole buildings and convert them. So you're not putting that money in the hands of individuals. The larger the company, the more lawyers they have, the less tax they're going to pay, because they're paying somebody smart to not evade, but legally pay as little tax as possible, as you would if you're there for profit, as opposed to an owner who's going to pay much more tax on that. I don't know. It just seems a vicious cycle of the man winning to me, but alas.
No, I think you raised really interesting points. It is that idea, isn't it? It's like, why is it okay in one form and then completely frowned upon in another form? Neither makes sense, right? And it's like, it's another angle to this whole over tourism, crunch points in capital cities that we've talked about. With one hand, you're giving out licenses, with the other, you're taking them away. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? We nailed it, didn't we? We nailed it, guys. We've reasonably finished on time as well. Not bad for us. So nice to see both of you. Am I having another half hour with you both next week? Am I lucky enough to get that?
Let's see. Let me check my calendar, Leo.
There you go, Sarah. Playing hard to get.
Yeah, I could do next week. Sure.
There you go. What a win. What a win. Yeah. What a win. Raphi, enjoy the rest of your holiday. If you've enjoyed any of the stories in today's show, please hit like, subscribe, follow the show on all the usual social channels. Thanks for joining us.